let's just find one little bit. Yeah, here we go. U.S. fascism. sorry, I fooled you. It's not happy news. It's about central planning and fascism. Oh, look, Donald Trump. U.S. car makers could produce missiles. As we know, he's been pushing for them to do that, and other arms. Washington wants to expand weapons production after reportedly depleting key stockpiles in the Iran war in Ukraine. Because, nothing says healthy economy better than central planning. You think, they said that Stalin had an eyeball collection on his desk in formaldehyde, glass jars. And that when he died, they burned the eyeballs and you could smell the stench of it downwind. That's what they said. I don't know, right? You think Trump, because he's such a central planner. I mean, either, as I mentioned, it's possible. As I said, did you know that Donald Trump has an entire closet filled with brown shirts? I mean, as a collectivist, either a fascist or he's like, I kind of like the Stalin eyeball thing. So maybe those people he's been killing in the Caribbean, they collect the bodies, he pulls the eyeballs out or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's like Sammy Davis Jr. Hey, man, I lost my eye in a car crash, man. You know what I'm saying? Cat, dig, man, yeah. It's like, what? Yeah, and of course, this is an excellent report on the rising tide of mortgage frauds inside the economy. Kudos to AIER. I'm going to go on into this in more detail tomorrow night, but this is on their website right now. Right now, as the Sex Pistols would say. Trillions in hidden distress and deferred losses are emerging as borrowers run out of time and options. America's debt reckoning has begun. And I'll just give you this. A toxic wave of delinquent balances, distressed loans, and overvalued assets is beginning to break across the American economy. Shanghai Commercial Bank just took an 85% loss on a half-finished Manhattan condo project. Whoops. The example demonstrates, quote, extend and pretend. That's the new lingo. Loan games are at work. The troubled property had been refinanced multiple times since 2016, repeatedly pushing back the maturity date and inevitable financial reckoning, even as costs mounted. This extend and pretend behavior is visible across various economic sectors. Debts have been refinanced and modified rather than repaid. Policymakers, lenders, and borrowers have responded to recent financial stress in the same way, not by addressing the pain, but by postponing it. Lenders, mortgage servicers, student borrowers, credit card swipers, and millions of others have relied on creative reshufflings, COVID-era accommodations, and a decade of unusually cheap credit to delay financing reality. Extend and pretend. Pretend, as they would say in Monty Python. So we'll give you some of that next time, my friends. And I think you'll find it valuable. It's a really, really good article. It fits with what Don Jeffries has been saying. It fits with what Gerald Celente has been saying in particular. Fits with what a lot of other people have been saying. Angry Tiger, folks who are cognizant of the economics of this bailout background where these people constantly get involved with moral hazards. They extend the moral hazards even more, and they future date stuff, thinking that they'll eventually be able to get a low interest loan that they can finally pay off. And so they'll pay this with the low interest loan, that sort of thing. And it just spirals. And of course, don't forget, they count the houses that are flipped and in the red as assets. But those assets are highly, highly overvalued. So they're counting them at that value. So then when they have to actually retrieve them and people default on their mortgages and the banks own these, they're going to have to auction these things. And when they auction them, they will have to auction them not at full price, at half or lower than that, much lower than that. I mean, we're talking liquidation sales. Again, I have experienced this. I was on the auction floors. I worked for an auction company getting out of college that sold off the properties that had been built because the FDIC expanded its insurance in the late 80s for loans and for banks. And so banks handed out loans much more recklessly. And the Clinton administration had pushed the banks to hand out loans to people who could not afford the loans. And it happened even worse a few years later with, of course, the 2008 bubble that crashed. But I was there on the auction floor. I saw what happened after the George H.W. Bush imbroglio. And they pushed the FDIC to increase the amount that they were insuring. And sure enough, a lot of people bought homes. They shouldn't have bought homes, and they couldn't pay anymore. So, like I said, I was there. One guy got 2 condos that were originally priced at $114,000 in like 1990, 91. Got them for $45,000 each. He bought 2. He bought one for himself and one for his mom. That's what's coming. Because all of the natural resources and temporal resources and monetary resources and human labor resources and intellectual resources, they have all been thrown into these things with people acting on the expectation that they're going to get a good return, and they are not going to get a good return. And people won't be able to afford their mortgages, and they will have to move out, and they will have to get whatever they can get before they move out. And that's what's going to happen. It might not happen before the next election, but it's coming. As Clutch says, don't worry, it's coming. So there you go. Now, I am going to give you a little something, my friends, for the end of the night, but I want to get your opinions on a few things. And I want to go back into Rumble and say hi to the Rumble team. Hello, Fruit Stripe Gum Colors of Rumble. Thank you. Angelo, no payment and low insurance are the only good things and easy to fix compared to a new car. Is only good things, and I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm misreading that. Sorry. So dump the banks. What elections? Yona, yeah, stay out of the banks, guys. And Skunk Hollow. Been on dairy farms my whole life. I thought I knew it all, but nope. And let's see. X says, the interweb says, yes, chickens absolutely love eating Japanese beetles. They provide a great source of free high-protein nutrition for your flock. Wow, I didn't know that. Pretty cool, you guys. Thank you so much. That's really cool. Wow. All right, my friends, let's get to it. Let me show you something awesome. We're going to go to the Outer Limits land, sort of like the Romper Room land, and we're going to go to the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel and get ready to do a segment for that and for you. On Tuesday, we're doing Textual Tuesdays, and I got a new book to tell you about.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Yes. Very cool. Oh, yes. Okay. I still remember when they were doing one of the episodes of Outer Limits, and Natasha Henstridge was in it, and I think Corbin Burnson was in it, and it was a great story. And they would do different versions of the episodes for the new version of Outer Limits. One was just syndication, the other was for like Cinemax, and they would have nudity for the cable one, and they would have a closed set. So I didn't realize that the set was closed. and they had the craft services table down there where you could get M&Ms and gum and, you know, some lemonade or whatever, high C stuff or whatever. And so I told Tom, my friend Tom Tanisco, I was like, oh, I'm going to go down and get some gum. And he goes, dude, you know, it's a closed set. And I was like, oh man. He goes, yeah. You know, I was like, do they have barriers? Do you think I can get to the craft services, or you think it would be bothering them? He goes, I try it anyway. Natasha Hescher's. I'm like, yeah. So then every time I was like, hey man, I'm going to go down to craft services, get some gum. And he goes, oh yeah, get some gum. Tom, man, he was a funny dude. Oh man, Tom, I hope you're watching. I'd love to get you on, man. He's such a great guy. Tom Tanisco, what a good guy. He did special effects later for Andromeda. He did a lot of the special effects for Andromeda with Kevin Sorbo, actually. So, okay, let's go over into the nonfiction side of the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel. And we're going to go to the 10th Amendment Center. Our friends, well, one friend, Michael, I know one Michael, and Michael Boldin, and I don't know the other Michael, although I know his work, Michael Maharrey. Michael and Michael, they're awesome. And Michael Maharrey also does a lot of work for Shift Gold. You probably have read his articles and stuff. Michael Maharrey, just so many great videos. Check out the 10th Amendment Center's channel on YouTube. You'll love it. The history, it's just so enriching. It's so good. And it's almost overwhelming sometimes. And I hate to say that to even plant the idea in your head, but it's almost overwhelming sometimes how much knowledge these guys can pack into 20 minutes. It's so good. And the history and the pictures and the highlighting of stuff. So you can go to the 10th Amendment Center. It's 10thamendmentcenter.com, not org. Okay. And they've got lots of good stuff. You can donate to them directly, all these things. And you can see here, the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence, as bad as Obama, Trump's 2025 gun control enforcement numbers, forgotten declaration, why they were fighting back, because, of course, they had taken up arms. And it was about a lot of things, not just taxes, a lot of things like arms, as we know in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, because they tried to get to an arms stockade in Portsmouth before Lexington and Concord. But the guys were able to get the stuff out early, and that's in the seacoast in New Hampshire, obviously Portsmouth, named after Portsmouth, England. But I got in the mail their newest book by Michael and Michael, and I want to show it to you. So this is going to be like Interesting Books Reviewed. My main man. I don't have the cat and I don't have the clock chiming 7 o'clock typically, but you can imagine I don't have the beard either or the looks. But they have released a new book at the 10th Amendment Center. So again, go to 10thamendmentcenter.com, check it out. They've got lots of great stuff, or go to their YouTube channel. You can see they've got the audio and video all there. Okay, Mike Maharrey's Minute and things like that. Great articles from these guys, lots and lots of good stuff. Okay, so 10thamendmentcenter.com, and here's the book. Let me show it to you real quick. There you go. The Anti-Federalists were right? Yes. So, Michael Boldin and Michael Maharrey. There you go. Michael and Michael. Martin, Mason, Jerry, Cato, and the Pennsylvania dissenters. The case against ratification. Now, as you know, I've steeped myself a lot in this stuff. Whether it's having read the Anti-Federalist papers in the hardcover edition, you know, like I said, when I was a DJ, I would just read those things and highlight and take notes like, yep, they were right about that. They were right about that. They were right about that. Or the awareness that Alexander Hamilton engaged in a usurpation by getting his friends to buy up the war bonds that had become worthless after the war, and farmers had bought them thinking they'd get repaid. Hamilton convinced his friends when the Articles of Confederation were extant and operative, and there were 11 presidents during the Articles. He convinced his banking friends to offer pennies on the dollar to get those bonds, and he promised those guys he would get a change in the government to allow for a central taxing authority that then would pay them the full freight for their war bond purchases, which is exactly what they did. They said that they were going to amend the Articles of Confederation in Philadelphia in 1787, but that's not what they did. And for an amendment of the Articles of Confederation, it required a 100% vote to amend the Articles. The Articles originally didn't have a taxing authority. They relied on the states to provide the money. The states at times were not providing the money. The states were printing up their own fiat currency. They were demanding specie currency for their own debts inside the states for taxes, and they were collecting that currency themselves rather than handing it off to the central government. So after the Continental Congress operated with the president, which was sort of a figurehead under the Articles of Confederation, then they had, certain banking and Eastern interests were very interested in doing what they called internal improvements. They called it the American system. Henry Clay picked it up after Alexander Hamilton. He was a scion of Hamilton's in an intellectual sense and philosophical sense, very, very dirty. And Abraham Lincoln was the same way, a scion of Clay's, very, very dirty, very corrupt. And don't forget, Abraham Lincoln, when he got into Congress, he bought a bunch of land and he sold the land for the unconstitutional transcontinental railroad project and had made sure, as many other politicians did, that the route was steered towards where he held the land. He made more money off his land sales to the federal government than he did his entire career as a lawyer in Illinois. So just a few things to keep in mind about that scumbag. Now, and if you're a big fan of Abraham Lincoln's, I used to be too, until I found out about Abraham Lincoln. So read Tom DiLorenzo's 2 books about Abraham Lincoln, or read Jeffrey Rogers Hummel's book, Emancipating Slaves and Slaving Free Men. Check it out. Go to the Mises Institute. They've got a very, very thick book called Reconsidering the Presidency on a bunch of different presidents. And I'm going to start reading segments from that 1,000 plus page book during the program here to add incentive to get people to watch, maybe some breakout sections, some more for Textual Tuesdays. But right now I want to read you the opening of this right here. And by the way, the so-called Whiskey Rebellion was not a rebellion. That was an unconstitutional invasion of Pennsylvania. The legislature of Pennsylvania had not asked for the feds to come in. According to Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, they have to ask before feds can go into a state. Either the legislature, or if the legislature is out of session, the governor can ask for them to come in. They did not ask. The so-called rebellion was announced by a friend of Hamilton's who was a judge who got appointed to the Supreme Court as a favor, and then they marched in with an army larger than the Army of the Potomac into Western Pennsylvania. They almost went into Ohio to seize the money of these guys who were using whiskey as a form of currency, and they weren't paying the taxes, the excise taxes on the whiskey. And that's one of the things that the Constitution allows. It allows for tariffs and excise taxes, but they have to be proportional. The problem is that it doesn't provide for a way to collect the taxes. So they invented it. They just went in and did it. So let me give you some of this information here. That's why I dislike Alexander Hamilton so much, because he was a massive criminal. He was a scumbag like Lincoln was. And people who worship Hamilton don't know what they're talking about. By the way, in the Federalist Papers, Hamilton claimed he wrote a bunch of Federalist Papers that they've discovered weren't written by him. They were written by James Madison. And he lied about that too. Here we go. This is the introduction. Michael Maharrey and Michael Boldin, Boldin, from the 10th Amendment Center. And as I said, if I can convince maybe 1 or 2 people while you're watching to open up a new tab, go over, order the book, or get on their email list and send them a message that you heard about them through me. Let them know. I love these guys. They're not full-on anarchists the way I am, but Michael Boldin's pretty darn close. I think Michael Maharrey might actually be. He's written some books on anarchism. Actually, now that I think about it. Introduction. One warning that led to all others. The Constitution wasn't born in harmony. Its ratification came out of a fight, bitter and bruising, with delegates to the convention, veterans of the Revolution, and respected public figures in open opposition. Remember, many of the signers of the Declaration never attended the Constitutional Convention. They protested. We'll give you an example of one of those people who protested. This is the Constitution now. So you have basically almost a decade of the Articles of Confederation. Then they move on, and Hamilton starts rabble-rousing for this new thing to amend the Articles. And then when they get there, they don't even try to amend. They say, oh, we're going to come up with a whole new system called the Constitution. It was an utter fraud. They came to be known as the Anti-Federalists. which is ironic because they were the ones who were actually in favor of federalism, as we know. The Articles of Confederation created a union of sovereign states. The Anti-Federalists saw the new Constitution as something else entirely, a consolidated national government with sweeping power over every individual and every corner of life. They weren't firmly against amending or changing the Articles. They were against the structure of the government proposed by the Constitution. This, they warned, was no mere reform. It was a counter-revolution in disguise. In Virginia's ratifying convention, George Mason zeroed in on the core shift. The Constitution was turning a union of states into one consolidated power. Quote, the very idea of converting what was formerly a confederation to a consolidated government is totally subversive of every principle which has hitherto governed us. End quote. That from George Mason, Virginia. The Pennsylvania dissenters saw the same danger spreading through every clause, warning that, quote, consolidation pervades the whole Constitution, end quote. Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts cut straight to the structural issue. The plan wasn't truly federal at all. Quote, the Constitution proposed has few, if any, federal features, but is rather a system of national government. That's Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts. So we have Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. Martin Luther believed this design was intentional, warning that it was, quote, calculated and designed to abolish and annihilate the state governments, end quote. And the pseudonymous Cato forecast the outcome, quote, a vile and arbitrary aristocracy or a monarchy, coming out of New York State. Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts had been one of the most active voices in Philadelphia, pushing for compromise and clarity. In the end, he walked away from the final draft. Mason, too, withheld his signature and carried the battle home to Virginia. From Maryland, Martin unleashed a barrage of warnings, hammering every danger he saw in the new plan. That's Luther Martin out of Maryland. Cato fired some of the first shots in print, pressing his cause to the people of New York. Shut out of the official record, Pennsylvania's dissenters took their protest to the public in print. Luther Martin argued the danger was deliberate. Elbridge Gerry and George Mason saw it as inevitable. But across every voice ran the same refrain: consolidated power is dangerous and cannot be trusted. So now they communicate with you. Why the study of the Anti-Federalists? It's impossible to understand the original legal meaning of the Constitution without reading the Anti-Federalists. Even James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution and one of the primary authors of the Federalist Papers, held this view, writing that to find its true meaning, we have to learn, quote, the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In short, right, Michael and Michael, in short, that means we have to learn what happened during the ratification debates. The Federalist Papers, for example, emerged from those debates. They remain among the most widely known and read documents from the time. But they are just one side of an argument. Defenses and rebuttals to objections that are rarely, if ever, heard today. To understand what the Federalists were defending, you also need to hear what the Anti-Federalists were charging. Madison didn't think this was optional. It was the only way to learn the real Constitution. In that sense alone, he said, it is the legitimate Constitution. Thomas Jefferson also pointed to the ratification debates as the answer to every question about the meaning of the Constitution. Quote, on every question of construction, carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed, end quote. Now, again, as an anarchist, I just want to say, no one has any right to sign a document, a piece of paper saying we're going to create a perpetual government that will rule over all these other people alive today who never gave us their permission and future generations. Your grandfather can't sign you into slavery. The voices collected in this book. This book presents key anti-federalist arguments from those debates, reconstructed from the writings and speeches of 5 leading opponents of ratification, drawing directly from their speeches and essays. Each chapter presents the perspective of one of the anti-federalist voices featured in this collection. Okay. 1, George Mason, a Virginia delegate who refused to sign the Constitution. He drafted the first formal objections at the close of the Philadelphia Convention and later took a leading role in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He warned of centralized power, an unchecked judiciary, and the absence of a Bill of Rights, arguments that became foundational to anti-federalist opposition across the states. 2, Luther Martin, a Maryland delegate to the convention. A Maryland delegate to the convention who, upon returning home, publicly denounced the Constitution in a lengthy address to the state legislature and in subsequent essays. He became one of the most detailed critics of the proposed plan. 3, Cato, the pseudonym of an unknown New York author who published one of the earliest series of anti-federalist essays, and they are awesome. That's why the Cato Institute is called the Cato Institute. He warned that the Constitution would pave the way to aristocracy, executive overreach, and endless war. 3, Elbridge Gerry, a Massachusetts delegate who refused to sign the Constitution. After the convention, he publicly outlined his objections in a letter to the state legislature. He warned that the proposed system would destroy the states and lay the foundation for a monarchy. 5. The Pennsylvania dissenters, a minority of the state's ratifying convention that issued a formal protest against the Constitution. They warned of sweeping federal power and denounced the rushed and coercive tactics used to secure ratification. They have here the consequences of consolidation. None of these anti-federalists spoke in vague platitudes. Their concerns were concrete, specific, and grounded in both experience and political philosophy. The following list doesn't cover every objection, but these 5 dangers were the most pervasive and recurring themes across all 5 figures in this collection. These were not isolated fears or speculative anxieties. Each objection emerged as a direct consequence of centralizing power away from the states and into a distant, consolidated national government. 1, taxation. To these critics, a central government with direct power to tax the people without going through the states was a fundamental threat to liberty. This wasn't theoretical. It meant federal agents were empowered to take from individuals directly without mediation or restraint. Luther Martin put the warning in vivid terms. The people would be taxed until they had nothing left, quote, as you would squeeze the juice from an orange till not a drop more can be extracted, end quote. George Mason warned that overlapping federal and state taxation would lead to one outcome, quote, the one will destroy the other. The Pennsylvania dissenters issued a stark warning, quote, Congress may command the whole or any part of the property of the people, end quote. Cato pushed further, predicting the rise of taxes enforced by soldiers. Elbridge Gerry gave the warning its most dramatic edge, predicting that, quote, the people will bleed with taxes at every pore, end quote. Their objections were rooted in more than budgetary concerns. This was about power. What happens when the federal government can reach into the lives and labor of every person in every state without limit? 2, military power. As they debated a new constitution, the revolution was fresh in their minds, a conflict sparked in part by standing armies, military occupation, and the use of force to support distant authority. These anti-federalists, hello, ICE. These anti-federalists lived through it. Some directly, others helped shape the new governments that emerged in its wake. All of them understood what it meant when soldiers answered to central power. Federal control over both a standing army and the state militias placed enforcement squarely in the hands of this new national government, not the states and not the communities expected to obey. For every anti-federalist in this collection, that was a flashing red warning sign. George Mason said, quote, I abominate and detest the idea of a government where there is a standing army, end quote. Luther Martin described how the president with full command could raise forces, neglect the militia, and use both against the people. Elbridge Gerry warned that stripping the states of control would leave them helpless to resist. I think we've seen that. The Pennsylvania dissenters cut straight to the point. The standing army and select militia will be used to collect taxes. Cato saw permanent force as the inevitable result of trying to govern such a vast territory, enforcement through suppression, not consent. To them, military power in federal hands wasn't a distant threat. It wasn't a recent memory and a clear sign of what happens. It is a clear sign of what happens when liberty is enforced at bayonet point. 3, a judiciary without limits. The Anti-Federalists consistently warned that the proposed federal judiciary would not simply coexist with state courts, it would override them. In doing so, it would erase a critical buffer of protection between the people and centralized power. Martin warned that federal courts would make justice unaffordable and inaccessible, especially for ordinary people. Mason foresaw a bias toward government officials and wealthy interests. Elbridge Gerry feared a resurrection of the Star Chamber, with civil cases stripped of jury trials. The Pennsylvania dissenters warned that, as structured, the judiciary alone would be enough to consolidate the entire system into one national government. The danger was clear. When judges are part of the federal government, they become its defenders, not an impartial check against it. Number 4, blended powers. Though the Constitution promised a separation of powers, these critics saw the opposite. Executive, legislative, and judicial branches were mixed in ways that would consolidate power and destroy liberty. Cato warned that the Senate and the president were given overlapping powers, a structure that blurred separation and invited consolidation. Mason argued that executive control over appointments and the military would make the legislature dependent, not independent. Gerry objected to the blending of legislature and executive power, especially in treaty making and the Senate's dual roles. Invoking Montesquieu, the Pennsylvania dissenters warned that uniting powers under one body would totally destroy liberty. For them, the separation of powers wasn't theory. It was an essential safeguard of liberty. And finally, 5, other dangers. While the first 4 themes echoed across every anti-federalist voice in this collection, they were far from the only warnings raised. Some warned that the Union was too large, too diverse, and too distant to be governed as a single republic. Others feared the power to regulate elections, including the time, place, and manner of voting. They feared that that would let those in office rig the system to keep themselves there. Several raised alarm over the treaty power, warning it could override state constitutions and bind the people to foreign entanglements without their consent. Still others warned that without a Bill of Rights, nothing would mark the boundaries the federal government could not cross. They argued unwritten assurances would prove worthless once power was consolidated, and only explicit limits could guard against an ambitious government. More than one warned that a permanent federal capital cut off from the states would grow into a hub of corruption, ambition, and aristocratic culture. These weren't fringe fears. They were structural warnings, grounded in history, sharpened by experience. So that is part of the introduction of this terrific new book, The Anti-Federalists Were Right, ? By Michael Boldin, Boldin, and Michael Maharrey, Maharrey, Maharrey. 10th Amendment Center, everybody. Check it out now. 10th Amendment Center. They're awesome. Check them out. There they are. And again, if you buy the book and you have a comment, and you want to say, I heard about this in Gardner Goldsmith's Liberty Conspiracy, let them know. Let them know. I love those guys. Send them the link to the show or something, because they're awesome. And I want Michael and Michael on the show as often as possible, many, many times, like once a month. It'd be awesome. So I hope that was interesting for you. Remember that book from the 10th Amendment Center. If I can convince one person, 2 people to go pick that book up, head over to the 10th Amendment Center and look at store, and you will see what is available. Sign up for their email and check it out now, A Funk Soul Brother. Yes, indeed. Get the books. Get the book. Remember, if you need to search for it, just do a quick search. The Anti-Federalists Were Right, 10th Amendment Center, and you'll find the books. I don't see it listed over there, but it's got to be around. Sign up for their emails. Don't forget. So it's good stuff. Meanwhile, I better get ready to go. It's 8:30 on a Tuesday. Let's check in and see what's going on with you as we get ready to go. Let's see. A lot of comments. Wow, a lot of comments. All right. And, of course, I will recommend, again, The Hologram of Liberty by Kenneth Royce, also known as Boston Tea Party. The Hologram of Liberty is phenomenal. And he goes into a lot of the pressures that were put on Rhode Island, the embargo that was threatened on Rhode Island, the way that pro-Constitution forces were sabotaging printing presses and shutting them down and arresting people, that sort of stuff within states. New Hampshire was one of them. So very interesting stuff and very, very troubling, because I don't think people understand just how corrupt it was when they put the Constitution in. Again, most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence who were invited to the Constitutional Convention did not attend. That shows you where things went wrong. And I would say they went wrong even before that, with the very idea that a government can be by the people, because it's only by a certain number of people who can get control of the government. And again, no one has any ethical or moral authority to tell you that they're signing a document for you. It doesn't work that way. What other things will they sign, right? Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Birdhouse Blue says, they never taught those anti-federalist lessons to us growing up in school. That's where I got lucky with Rick Hanchett. Best teacher I've ever had. He was great. Rick Hanchett taught college level stuff to the teenagers in high school. He had us read the Anti-Federalist letters and things like that, documents. And he would come walking into class doing the Ministry of Silly Walks. And he had walking sticks and he'd smash them down on the desk if students weren't paying attention. He was great. He was really, really cool. And yeah. And I think one of his greatest sayings was, of course, he coined the phrase, the oppressed become the oppressors. At least I think he coined it, which often happens. And then if somebody was, being obnoxious or something in class, he'd be like, may your slide down the banister of life be smooth and easy, and then turn into a razor blade. And they says, you wouldn't even feel it till it started catching on your bones. Yeah, man, he was all right. He was cool. So we got a lot more. I'll tell you some more on the immigration stuff later. Some other very, very important stuff, and also other information on Keir Starmer's resignation. George Galloway had some great comments about that, and also something out of Britain that's a cultural story. I'm not going to mention it now because it's pretty dark, so I won't go into it. Meanwhile, I've got a song, and I'm going to leave off with this song, and then when I make the former Star Trek writing fellow episode out of this, I mean, when the Russian team here in Moscow does that, I won't play the song, but I'll play the song as a go-away. This is from one of the best albums made of that era. Terrific album. The first album by The Fix, Shuttered Room. And it had Lost Planes, Red Skies, The Fool, Shuttered Room, of course. Lots of great, great stuff. I Found You. And it was their introduction to the United States. Nobody knew them until this record. Just a phenomenal record. Really, really good. And there's a song on it. And my fake band in college that, we put articles in the school paper saying that we were the hottest thing. And we all promised each other that it couldn't be a real band, no real music, nothing. We put posters up that said the band was playing. We posed for the pictures. And literally for 4 years, we did it just to fool people. Well, we were called The Strain. My friend Steve and I, it was essentially my idea. We were traveling we were out near Boston College, and some girls just walked right by us in a generic pizza place. And I told Steve, I was like, geez, they didn't even give us a glance. And he's like, speak for yourself, Quasimodo. I'm facing the other way. I was like, well, okay, they didn't give me a glance. I was like, if we were in a band, they'd be all over us. We wouldn't even have to be in a band. We could just have empty guitar cases and pretend we were in a band and have British accents and talk about how the limo hadn't arrived to pick us up for the gig. And they'd be all over us. He's like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, we had to start a fake band, catch all the posers. So by the time we took the Boston T back from Boston College down into Kenmore Square and switched over to the B line and went back to our dorm on Commonwealth Avenue, we had created the whole strain. I was Glem, their frenetic guitarist, capital G, capital L, because one capital letter is insufficient, with an exclamation point at the end of it. He was our drummer, Gordon Gatsby, Winston Groom Flahib III, and of course, Jr. And of course, our keyboardist was named Nile Ghost. However, he replaced our original keyboardist, who was known as Exodus Payne. Exodus Payne was heavily into the occult, and he provided some amazing keyboard sounds. However, he disappeared one dark and evil night when we played a show in Haiti. And the last thing that anyone ever heard from him was when he disappeared out in the wilderness at night. And he said, the paw, don't wish on the paw. And then he was gone. We never saw him again. However, we did get Nile Ghost, who originally was playing on the streets of Paris as part of the band called Nile Ghost and the Fabulous Flirtations. It was actually just him and a keyboard, a Casio keyboard with a monkey in a bucket. But, he had the name. So Nile Ghost was with us. And then, of course, our lead singer, Ian Flesh, named after my friend Ian, who played bass for Gigi Allen and was a very handsome dude. So then we had a bunch of different people who were helping us. Our manager was a British guy named Sean Naylor, that being the same Sean Naylor who writes for Army Times, wrote the book Not a Good Day to Die, and was one of the journalists who exposed the fact that the CIA was spying on Julian Assange. He was our fake manager, Sean, because he had a British accent. So, calling radio stations, hello, hello. It was classic. So that's The Strain. We named The Strain after my favorite song from this album. Essentially, I named The Strain. And Steve was along for the ride as we created it. And by the way, that same night, on the way out, I created T-Miser. And on the way back, I created The Strain. And by the way, The Strain appears in the T-Miser novel. And no, they're not a real band. So let's go with that song by The Fix. By the way, if you want to contribute to the show, if you think what you're getting is good, then you can sign up to be a paid subscriber at my Substack, the Gardening Goldsmith Substack. You can donate over at Rumble. You can become a monthly subscriber over at Rumble. And inside the podcast for any of the audio podcasts at my Gardener Goldsmith Substack, for the podcast, you'll see the PayPal link is always there. And we are trying to build. We do have a schedule for the end of the month. We're a little bit behind by about $30-$40. So got my fingers crossed. We'll see how it goes. And I hope everybody has a great night.